If you haven't, you need to play Metal Gear Solid, a game originally released on the PlayStation 1, but also came to PC. It has since had many HD collection releases on basically every modern type of system, as well as a GameCube remaster made in the Metal Gear Solid 2 engine called Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. When a video game director wants to become a movie director, the product you get is Metal Gear Solid. The series creator Hideo Kojima had an early desire to create films. He's always had a passion for film, and Metal Gear Solid was what brought his love of movies and games together. The average playthrough of Metal Gear Solid is going to be anywhere between about 11 to 12 hours, of which 2 hours are probably cutscenes, another 2 hours for codex calls, which are essentially voice-only cutscenes. So your average playthrough of this game might be up to 40% of your play having no input on the controller. The presentation of the game is quite unique as well, especially for its time. Every time a new character is introduced, not only do you get their name of the character on screen, but the credit of the voice actor below it. And this game follows a pretty typical 3-act structure that you normally see in a movie. Games in this era, typically JRPGs, were known for their narrative storytelling, but in 1998, Metal Gear Solid had ambitions of doing all of the storytelling using voice acting and a major reliance on cutscenes and video. In the mid to late 90s, if a game pushed a deeper narrative, it was typically an RPG or JRPG, with much of the story and context being pushed through lore in the game and told through usually just a handful of cutscenes and text that wasn't voice acted. And often, though many of these games had great stories, they weren't always concise and were told using multiple arcs. Not, again, your typical 3-act structure. Different characters are going to go through different arcs, and you're going to have multiple acts, many more than 3 in many PS1 era RPGs or JRPGs. The other way a lot of narratives were told in games back then were more simple and straightforward. They're your typical, you're presented with some narrative, often a cutscene or text. You press start, then you have your mission. When the mission is over, it's a hard segment to more narrative and text. You push start and you go on to the next mission. Kojima and Konami were some of the first to truly attempt a cinematic experience when it came to a video game. Though the game was 3 or 4 times the length of a movie, it often almost felt as though it had the same pace, and it invested a lot of its resources into the appearance and delivery of that experience. The game took a lot of real-world aspects into account to also tell its story as well, not doing kind of the conventional thing at this time of kind of creating a lot of unique lore that was not related to reality. Metal Gear Solid captures one of my favorite aspects of a narrative, whether it's a video game, book, or movie. It's always been very challenging for me to describe it. I have a fondness for a story that makes the protagonist and I feel the foundation for the start of an adventure and the conclusion of that said adventure. In Metal Gear Solid, the stakes are set up and you can see the path of the journey laid out in front of you. And through a story like this, there's discovery and usually a sense of power gained and achieved. Then when you get to third act, you can tell that everything is crossing up to a line of no return. And there's a point in the story where that point of no return has been crossed. What I'm describing for me isn't personally just that standard 3-act structure, though that is part of it. That is likely more the scaffolding of the feeling I get when I played this game, or other stories that follow this give me the same type of feeling. It just requires the right pacing, setup, and payoff, and all these have to work in tandem together. Again, it's hard to explain, but this is one of the few stories that just does everything in such the right way. It just truly feels epic. Metal Gear Solid was the first game to present this aspect of storytelling to me. I didn't gain from like a movie or a book. Before Metal Gear Solid, I had watched or played other games with deeper, interesting stories. Again, many of those were JRPGs, but that was more akin to like a TV show rather than a film. And the experience I'm describing is usually hard to get if you can't get it if you have to go through more than one or two sittings. The magic of how much of this is done is how Metal Gear Solid blends all the cutscenes and codecs is together throughout the game and the gameplay. These narrative breaks could easily feel like interruptions, but instead they bind with the gameplay and make the story lay out in a satisfying way. Often in this era, cutscenes were a reward for the gameplay, and if you become invested in the story of Metal Gear Solid, it is not only a special experience, but also a unique one in many ways. There are certain games for many of us which we were either played or exposed to that left a major impact on us one way or another. Before I share my thoughts on that, I want to introduce one of our other EXP Monthly members, Miss Moon, who is going to share her thoughts on Metal Gear Solid.
Hey, this is Miss Moon here to interject for a moment to express why Metal Gear Solid is such a great title even today. I was fortunate to experience MGS1 in 1998, and it is one of the prime examples of what made gaming in the late 90s through the 2000s feel special. It was what I considered that sweet spot where games struck a balance between cinematic storytelling and gameplay without feeling like one element was overshadowing the other. Of course, this game wouldn't be what it is without the mind of Hideo Kojima, who, as we know, has a peculiar way of writing. He delves into the exploration of identity through the concept of nature versus nurture as a super soldier in this realistic yet fantastical narrative. For example, how much of what we inherit genetically dictates who we are, and how much choice do you have in who you ultimately become? You explore these questions all while fighting some of the most Marvel-coded villains and trying to keep a nuclear weapon from falling into the wrong hands. I could go on and on about what makes this game so unique, from the art style of Yoji Shinkawa to the music of Harry Gregson Williams, all the way down to the incredible vocal performances by the main cast, of course, with one of them being the legendary David Hayter as Solid Snake. This game represents one of the best of what I consider the golden era of gaming, and I'm so looking forward to revisiting it again in EXP Monthly.
For me personally, Metal Gear Solid takes me back to the late 90s as a kid. I've mentioned it many times before about the youngest of five, and I have so many memories, specifically in the 90s, of the Super Nintendo and PS1, where I would watch my older brothers play generally more complex or story-driven games, and I was just invested watching, hanging out with them as they went through these games. It was often almost like, for me, binging like a TV show. Metal Gear Solid still takes me back to watch my brothers fight some of the characters like Sniper Wolf or this giant walking robot at the end. It was the first time I really learned and heard concepts like nuclear war, the military-industrial complex. As an adult, I did become very invested into military history and geography, and I think a lot of this influence does come from Metal Gear Solid, because I remember it would have been 8 or 9 around this time, learning where Russia and Alaska were. I remember asking my teachers back in elementary school about the history of the US and Russia, because of this game. As Miss Moon stated, it brought the ideas of nature versus nurture. And at that age, I wasn't still grasping those concepts, but when I look back and reflect, I can recognize as a kid, I was still experiencing them. There's characters in the game that I remember hoping they would change, hoping they would break free of those nature versus nurture. And again, I couldn't quantify it as a kid, but I reflect back and I recognize I was challenging and thinking about these concepts, just not in a direct way. And as a game, I just go back to my earlier statement. It's a game that just feels like a journey. And it's something that so many games and movies really it's really hard to do in the way that I'm in the type of feeling I get. And this might have been the first game that ever gave me this like truly epic journey feeling and experience. I think that reflects in how we played the game too. Whether I was watching my brothers or playing it for myself, often like the first third of the game, we treated more like a sandbox. We're trying to do silly things, being funny, running around, just exploring what was possible to do in the game. As we got further into the game, again, no spoilers, but there's things that start to occur where we start to really focus on the mission of the game and getting to the next part, getting to the next cutscene, wanting to know more about the story rather than the gameplay. And when it gets to the end of the game, again, you can sense the characters and the protagonist are never going to be the same. There's a line that's been crossed that can't go back. And it's one of those games where when I get to the end, I'm happy, I'm beating the game, it's satisfying, but I'm almost sad, both as a narrative and as a player. I want the game to go on. I know it can't, and it's just, you're closing the final chapter of a good story, and there's something that's always bittersweet about that. So if you haven't played it, I highly recommend you play Metal Gear Solid. If it's been a long time since you played or experienced it, again, I recommend you go back and give it another shot and just see how that experience now is on a fresh playthrough. And as always, check out EXP Monthly. Join us, share your thoughts and experiences in the Discord, the comments below. Be a part of a great community and podcast. I'm Filbert. I hope to see you there. Again, links in the description, and we'll catch you for the podcast.